The mess hall of Camp Harlow always smelled like a strange mixture of coffee, disinfectant, and the lingering aroma of last night's reheated rations. Conversations buzzed across the large room as recruits in freshly issued uniforms tried their best to blend in, follow rules, and avoid catching the attention of instructors. It was early evening, the one time of day when the atmosphere relaxed just enough for them to breathe, though nobody ever fully let their guard down. New faces entered every day, and tonight, one particular face would change the way four overly confident recruits thought about the world, themselves, and what real strength looked like. She entered with quiet steps, measured, controlled, almost too steady for someone the recruits assumed was just another transfer from a different training unit. Her presence didn't draw attention at first. The mess hall stayed too busy for anyone to notice yet another uniform among hundreds. But if someone had been paying closer attention, they might have noticed the way she scanned the room with precise micro-movements, the way her shoulders stayed perfectly aligned, or the way her boots made no unnecessary sound on the waxed floor. She moved like someone who had spent years in situations where a single misplaced sound could give away a position and cost lives. Her hair was tied back, her posture neutral, her expression unreadable. She grabbed a tray, collected a basic dinner portion, and sat alone at the edge of a long table near the far side of the room. She didn't slouch. She didn't scroll through her phone. She didn't even look bothered when she noticed four young recruits whispering about her from a few tables away. Those four, Miller, Johnson, Ortega, and Pike, had developed a habit over the last 3 weeks. They whispered, cracked jokes, bragged loudly, and acted as though training wasn't pushing them to the edge of collapse. They were competent at best, irresponsible at worst, but together they formed a tiny echo chamber that fed each other's overconfidence. And right now, they were directing that same reckless energy toward the quiet woman sitting alone. Miller squinted in her direction while chewing aggressively. Who's that? Haven't seen her before. Probably another admin transfer. Johnson smirked. Admin? With those shoulders? Nah. She thinks she's tough. Look at the way she sits. Probably came from one of those light support units. Ortega chuckled. She doesn't look that strong. Bet she's hiding the fact she couldn't hack it in regular training. Pike nudged them, trying to keep his voice slightly lower but failing. Let's go welcome her to the mess hall then. They laughed, each imagining the type of conversation they'd start. Teasing, maybe some playful intimidation, nothing they considered harmful. But intentions don't erase consequences, and tonight they were about to discover how disastrously wrong assumptions can be. The four of them stood and walked toward her table. Around them, other recruits kept eating, unaware that the dynamic of the room was about to shift. The woman didn't look up when they approached, not because she was nervous, but because she had already tracked their movements from the moment they pushed their chairs back. Miller spoke first, leaning too casually against the edge of her table. Hey there, you knew. She lifted her eyes just enough to acknowledge them, then gave a single nod. Transferred in today. Her voice was calm, even-toned, devoid of any attempt to impress or intimidate. Ortega interpreted that calmness as uncertainty. Where from? He asked. Classified. She replied simply, returning to her meal. The recruits exchanged looks, barely holding back snickers. Johnson pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Without invitation. Classified. Huh, that's a good one, he said with a grin. Look, we're all family here. You don't have to be shy. She paused, fork midway to her lips, and looked at him, not annoyed, not surprised, but as though she was assessing the structural integrity of a wall she planned to walk through if necessary. I'm not shy, she said. Johnson leaned forward. All right then. What unit? Logistics. Medical. Something easy. Before she could respond, Pike jumped in. Let me guess. You came from one of those training cycles where they let everyone pass. This time she set down her fork. Not harshly, not with irritation, just softly, deliberately. You're making a lot of assumptions, she said. Her tone didn't rise. It didn't carry an edge. It was far too level for someone surrounded by four overly eager recruits, and that neutrality made the situation more uncomfortable than if she had responded with anger. Miller crossed his arms. We're just trying to figure out what makes you think you can sit alone and act like you're too good for everyone. She blinked, not once revealing even a flicker of emotional reaction. I'm sitting alone because I prefer silence when I eat. Pike laughed. Silence. In this place. Good luck with that. Miller tapped a finger against the table. Look, you don't need to act tough. The woman exhaled slowly, not impatiently, more like someone remembering they were dealing with people who didn't yet know the world beyond training drills and staged scenarios. She reached for her drink, took a sip, and stood. Her tray remained in place. Her posture stayed relaxed. I'm not acting tough, she said softly. If I wanted to act tough, you'd know. The 4 recruits burst into laughter, loud enough to catch the attention of nearby tables. Recruits turned their heads, curious. A few rolled their eyes, expecting yet another petty confrontation between trainees. But what happened next was nothing anyone expected. Pike stepped a little closer, still smiling. You think you can take all 4 of us? She looked at them as though the question itself was unnecessary. I don't think anything, she said. I know what I'm capable of. Before anyone could respond, the mess hall doors opened sharply. Chief Petty Officer Harland entered, his boots instantly silencing the room. A man known for breaking hardened recruits with nothing but a glance, Harland scanned the hall, but his eyes stopped the moment they fell on the 4 recruits surrounding the woman. His jaw tightened. Miller, Johnson, Ortega, Pike, he barked, voice echoing off steel and tile. Front and center. Now. The recruits froze, confused. Harland didn't wait for them to move. He stepped closer, gaze shifting briefly toward the woman before flicking back to the 4 men. Do you 4 have any idea who you're talking to? He growled. Miller swallowed. Sir, we were just. Quiet. Harland's voice was sharp enough to cut air. You don't speak unless I tell you to. They snapped into silence instantly. Harland turned his attention to the woman. Lieutenant, my apologies. I should have escorted you personally. The 4 recruits, faces drained of color. Lieutenant. Their eyes widened in perfect synchronization. The woman gave Harland a small nod. No harm done, Chief. I expected something like this. The chief looked as though he wanted to lecture half the room for not stopping what had happened, but he forced himself to stay on task. Recruits, he said slowly, you were just mouthing off to a Navy SEAL. The collective intake of breath from nearby tables rippled like a wave. Forks dropped. Conversations halted. Even the kitchen staff paused. Nobody spoke. Nobody could. The recruits stared at her, stunned, suddenly. Noticing everything they had missed. Her stance, her controlled breathing, the calmness she carried like a second skin. Nothing about her seemed exaggerated, nothing forced. She wasn't showing off. She simply existed with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced real danger and survived. Harland continued, this is Lieutenant Raven Hale. She returned from deployment 48 hours ago. I don't need to explain the kind of operations she's been part of. But in case you 4 are still confused, let me put it plainly, she has more combat experience than all of you put together. And she's here temporarily to oversee an advanced phase of your training. The recruits suddenly stood straighter, fear prickling across their skin. Everything they'd said in the last 2 minutes replayed in their minds like a cruel montage. Johnson tried to speak. Sir, we didn't know. Of course you didn't, Harland cut in. Because you didn't think. That's the problem. The woman, Lieutenant Hale, stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Harland's arm. Chief, it's fine, really. Harland exhaled, visibly restraining himself. If you say so, Lieutenant. She turned to the 4 recruits, and her expression softened, not in a warm, friendly way, but in a manner that suggested she understood more about human misjudgment than they ever would. You're young, she said. Inexperienced. You see someone sitting alone and you assume weakness. But strength doesn't look the same on everyone. Remember that. The recruits lowered their eyes. Not because they were embarrassed, though they were, but because they felt something deeper, a realization settling heavily in their minds. Lieutenant Hale continued, you judged before you understood. And in the field, that kind of mistake gets people killed. The words hit them harder than any shouted insult. She didn't lecture. She didn't brag about her experience. She didn't threaten them. She simply stated a truth with the weight of someone who knew what it meant firsthand. The mess hall remained silent, all eyes fixed on her. Then she said something none of them expected. Now that introductions are out of the way, we'll be spending time together during this training phase. You'll learn things you didn't know you needed to learn. And I expect discipline, humility, and effort from each of you. The recruits nodded rapidly, their previous arrogance stripped away. Harland gave the four a final glare. Consider this your warning. You're only one. With that, he left the mess hall, trusting that Lieutenant Hale could handle herself. She looked at the four recruits once more and said, "Get your food. Sit. We'll talk." They hesitated. She raised a brow. "I said sit, not panic." Slowly, awkwardly, they obeyed. The dynamic had shifted entirely. No laughter, no joking, just quiet respect mixed with a healthy dose of fear. As they took their seats, Miller cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we're sorry." She nodded. "Apology accepted. Now learn from it." Ortega spoke next. "Ma'am, are you really a SEAL?" She gave a small smile. "Yes." Johnson swallowed. "And you're here to train us?" "Partially," she said, "but mostly, I'm here to evaluate you." Pike looked anxious. "Evaluate? How?" "Your mindset," she replied. "Your teamwork. Your ability to adapt. I don't care how fast you run or how many push-ups you think you can brag about. I care about your judgment. Your instincts. Your willingness to become better than you were yesterday." They listened intently, absorbing every word like it was oxygen. She leaned back slightly. "You have potential, all of you, but potential means nothing without discipline. And none of you has earned the right to look down on anyone." The recruits nodded vigorously. She continued, softer now, "The battlefield doesn't care about your assumptions. It doesn't care about your ego. It doesn't care if the person next to you is a man or a woman. All that matters is capability." The room remained silent as more recruits started eating again, though many continued stealing glances toward the corner table where Lieutenant Hale and the four recruits sat. In the quiet that followed, she ate a few more bites, then pushed her tray away. "I'll see you all at dawn," she said. "You're going to be tired, sore, frustrated, and by the end of tomorrow, you'll understand exactly why I'm here." She stood, collected her tray lightly, and walked away, not in a hurry, not in irritation, but with the same calm control she had entered the room with. The four recruits watched her leave, each processing the encounter differently. Miller exhaled shakily. "We messed up." Johnson nodded. "Big time." Ortega rubbed the back of his neck. "But at least she didn't break our bones." Pike forced a small, nervous laugh. "Yeah, she could have killed us in 10 seconds. They looked at each other, realizing the truth in that statement. For the next minute, none of them spoke. The room slowly returned to normal noise levels, though the energy had undeniably shifted. Everyone had seen something rare, something humbling. Finally, Miller leaned forward. "Tomorrow's going to be rough." Johnson exhaled. "Tomorrow's going to be hell." Ortega whispered, "But maybe, we need it." Pike nodded. "Yeah, we definitely need it." Silence settled over them again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, transformative. A clarity had replaced their earlier cockiness. A feeling that the world was far bigger, far harder, and far more complex than they had believed just 45 seconds earlier. The encounter didn't just change their evening. It changed their training. It changed their future. And it changed the way they viewed strength forever. Across the hall, Lieutenant Hale paused near the exit and looked back at them. She gave a small nod. The kind of nod leaders give to people who might someday be worthy of responsibility, if they worked hard enough. The recruits straightened instinctively, even from a distance. Then she walked out, disappearing into the night. A minute later, Miller finally spoke with a crooked half-grin. "Well, guess we're not the toughest ones around here." Johnson snorted. "No kidding." Ortega sighed. "Man, we really need to improve." Pike leaned back. "Starting tomorrow." Miller looked at him. "Starting now." And for the first time since they met each other, all four agreed without a joke, without sarcasm, and without argument. From across the table, another recruit who had been listening leaned over and said, "Hey, you four, mind if I join your extra training tomorrow?" Miller blinked. "Extra training?" The recruit smirked. "You think a Navy SEAL shows up for fun? She's going to break you. I want in." The four looked at each other and shrugged. "Sure," they said almost in unison. Word spread across the room in seconds. More recruits approached, asking questions, hoping to join whatever was coming. In less than 10 minutes, a dozen had gathered. Then 20. Then almost the entire hall. And for the first time since arriving, the 4 recruits realized they weren't just part of training anymore. They were part of a transformation. A different recruit finally asked, "Who was she, anyway?" Pike smiled faintly. "Lieutenant Hale." Ortega added, "Navy SEAL." Johnson nodded. "And she's here to evaluate us." Miller finished the thought. "And we're not gonna fail." The room hummed with a new kind of energy, anticipation mixed with determination. The type of energy that appears only when people truly want to grow. And somewhere outside, under the dim lights of the training grounds, Lieutenant Hale walked with the silent confidence of someone who had just changed the trajectory of dozens of young recruits without throwing a single punch. Later that night, as the mess hall cleared out and lights began dimming, a narrator-style voice echoed in the minds of every viewer listening to this story. If you enjoyed this story and want more real, intense, military-inspired tales, make sure you subscribe to Bravo Warrior Stories. Every week we bring you gripping narratives of courage, discipline, and the unseen heroes who walk among us. Hit that subscribe button right now and become part of the Warrior community. And just like that, the story of 4 recruits surrounded by their own arrogance, and the Navy SEAL who shattered it in under a minute, came to an end. But their training, that was only beginning.